Your brain is already a magnet. It just hasn't been tuned to attract wealth. It's been tuned to attract lack. Say that to yourself slowly, because this isn't a figure of speech. Every single day, your mind scans the world around you and filters out almost everything, pulling toward you only what it's been conditioned to search for. And right now, without your permission, that search has been aimed at scarcity. The bill before the opportunity. The reason it won't work before the reason it might. The empty part of the account before the part that's still there. This isn't a character flaw. It isn't bad luck. It's a frequency, and frequencies can be retuned. Not through wishing, not through pretending, through something far more specific, far more mechanical, and far more within your reach than you've ever been told. In the next few minutes, you're going to understand exactly how that frequency got set in the first place, and the precise process that retunes it, one repetition at a time, until money stops feeling like something you chase and starts feeling like something that simply finds you. Let's start with something most people never stop to question: the actual mechanics of how a mind decides what to notice. Napoleon Hill spent decades observing something he couldn't fully explain with the science of his time, but he described it with remarkable precision anyway. He noticed that the men who accumulated real wealth all shared a particular quality of attention, not intelligence, not even ambition in the way most people picture it, but a selective focus so consistent it looked, from the outside, like the world was simply cooperating with them more than it cooperated with everyone else. It wasn't cooperation. It was tuning. Here's what modern neuroscience has since confirmed, in language Hill never had access to but clearly sensed anyway. Your senses take in millions of pieces of information every second: sounds, faces, conversations, passing possibilities. Consciously, you register almost none of it. Your mind isn't showing you the world. It's showing you a curated slice of it, filtered by a structure at the base of your brain that decides, mostly without asking your permission, what's worth letting through the door. Think about the last time you bought a car, a specific make, a specific color, and suddenly started seeing that exact model everywhere. On the highway, in parking lots, at the gas station. Nothing about the world changed. Those cars were always there. What changed is that your internal radar reclassified them as relevant, and once something gets marked relevant, your mind stops treating it as background noise and starts placing it directly in front of you. Now here's the part that changes everything once you actually sit with it. That exact radar, the one that surfaces cars, or a lyric you just learned, or a word you just discovered and now hear constantly, is the same system deciding whether you notice a financial opportunity or walk straight past it without ever registering it existed. If that internal lens has been trained, over years, to flag scarcity as the important signal, bills, shortages, reasons things won't work, it will hand you scarcity with impressive efficiency. Not because the world is conspiring against you, because you built a lens, without meaning to, that goes looking for exactly that. Picture two people sitting in the same coffee shop. One notices, without even trying, a conversation 2 tables over about someone hiring for well-paid work. The other hears nothing but background chatter, sitting in that exact same air. Same room, same information. 2 completely different instruments deciding what counts as signal and what gets thrown away as noise. This is the idea Hill circled back to throughout his work. That thought, repeated with enough emotional weight behind it, doesn't just occupy your mind. It reprograms what your mind goes looking for. He wasn't describing wishing something into existence from nowhere. He was describing something closer to retuning an instrument, so it finally starts picking up frequencies it used to ignore completely. This is where the magnet in the title earns its place. Instead of just sounding poetic, a magnet doesn't chase metal filings across a table. It doesn't hustle, force, or work harder to make the outcome happen. It simply holds a field, consistently, and whatever falls within range responds on its own. Wealth-oriented opportunity behaves in a strikingly similar way. People who seem to have money find them aren't doing anything mystical. They've built an internal field steady enough that relevant signal gets drawn toward their attention automatically, while a mind tuned to scarcity pulls in exactly what confirms scarcity instead. This also explains something that quietly frustrates a lot of people: why simply wanting more money, hoping for a shift, so rarely produces one. Wanting doesn't retune anything. It's just noise layered on top of an unchanged system. The lens only shifts through repeated, specific, emotionally charged attention, a very different thing from a passing wish made during a hard month. Think about someone who spent years saying, "I'm just not good with money," almost as a joke, a throwaway line at dinner. That sentence, repeated enough times, stops being a description. It becomes an instruction. The lens hears it as a standing order. Keep surfacing evidence that supports this. And it will. Loyally. Efficiently. Because that's exactly what it was trained to do. So if a lens can be trained toward scarcity without anyone intending it, the far more interesting question becomes this: what does it actually take to deliberately retune it in the other direction, without falling into the trap of empty repetition that never changes anything real? So let's answer that question honestly, because the answer isn't complicated, but it is uncomfortable for anyone hoping for a shortcut. You retune an instrument the same way it got detuned in the first place. Repetition. Except this time, on purpose, instead of by accident. Here's something worth understanding clearly, because it changes how you think about the whole process. Every belief you currently hold about money, every assumption about what's possible for you, what isn't, what people like you get to have, was built through nothing more sophisticated than repeated exposure. Nobody sat you down and proved these beliefs true with evidence. You simply heard them, or lived them, enough times that your mind stopped questioning them and started treating them as fact. Repetition doesn't require truth. It only requires consistency, which means the belief was never permanent. It was just well rehearsed. Think about a language you didn't grow up speaking. If you moved to a new country tomorrow and heard that language constantly, at the store, on the street, in every conversation around you, something would shift after enough months. Words that once sounded like meaningless noise would start arranging themselves into sense. Not because you studied grammar charts for hours, because your brain, exposed repeatedly to the same patterns, quietly built new structure to accommodate them. Nobody would call that magic. They'd call it immersion. And wealth consciousness gets built through the exact same mechanism. Immersion, not intensity. This is where a lot of people go wrong. And it's worth naming directly, because you've probably tried this before without knowing why it didn't stick. Somebody tells you to repeat a phrase like, "Money flows to me easily," a few times in the mirror, and when nothing changes after a week, you conclude the whole idea doesn't work. But that's like hearing 3 words of a new language and deciding you'll never speak it. The instrument didn't have time to rebuild. You gave it a whisper and expected a shout back. Real retuning happens on a timeline most people find almost boring. That's exactly why so few people actually stay with it long enough to feel it work. Hill wrote about the mind needing what he called auto-suggestion, delivered with feeling, repeated with the same discipline you'd give a physical practice. Not because repetition is exciting, but because repetition is the only thing your subconscious actually responds to as instruction rather than noise. Here's an image that might help this land somewhere deeper than theory. Picture a riverbed carved into stone. That groove wasn't cut in one dramatic afternoon. It was cut by the same water passing over the same path, day after day, for years, until the stone simply gave way and the water's direction became permanent. Your scarcity beliefs are a riverbed, carved slowly, without ceremony, through years of the same thought passing over the same mental terrain. And here's the part that should feel like relief instead of discouragement. New water, directed consistently enough, cuts new stone. It's slower than people want, but it's not harder. It's just patient. This is why Hill placed so much emphasis on precision rather than vague positivity. A generic thought like, "I want to be rich," is water with no direction. It spreads out, thin and shapeless, and never cuts anything deep enough to matter. A clear, repeated thought, attached to an actual number, a real picture, a genuine feeling of what having that number would mean for an ordinary Tuesday, for a phone call with your kid's school, for the sound of your own breathing when a bill arrives. That thought has enough shape to actually carve something. Picture someone who spends 2 years writing the same figure in a journal every morning, not as wishful decoration, but attached each time to a different vivid detail. What it would feel like handing a parent a check that finally mattered. What her shoulders would feel like without the tightness they'd carried for a decade. Nothing shifts for months. And then, almost quietly, opportunities that have nothing to do with journaling begin appearing. A referral that would have gone unnoticed a year earlier. A conversation once dismissed as small talk suddenly registering as relevant. The riverbed has cut deep enough that new water starts finding its own way through. This is the part that tends to get lost when people talk about manifestation as if it's a spell. It isn't summoning something from nothing. It's exposure, repeated with precision and feeling, until your instrument physically starts registering a frequency it used to filter out completely. But repetition alone, even precise repetition, still leaves out one variable, and it might be the most overlooked variable in this entire process. Because two people can repeat the exact same words, with the exact same discipline, and produce two completely different results. The difference isn't the words. It's what's happening underneath them. That variable is emotion, not enthusiasm, not forced positivity, something closer to conviction, felt in the body, not just recited by the mouth. Here's the distinction most people miss entirely. You can say the same sentence twice, technically identical, and produce two completely different instructions to your subconscious depending on what's happening beneath the words. Say, "I am becoming wealthy," while your chest is tight, your shoulders are braced, and some quiet part of you is thinking, "Yeah, right." And your subconscious doesn't register the sentence. It registers the tension. It hears the disbelief riding just beneath the surface, and between the two signals, the deeper one always wins. This is why repeating an affirmation flatly, mechanically, like reading a grocery list, rarely moves anything. It's not that the words are wrong. It's that words without felt conviction behind them are just sound. Your subconscious was never built to respond to vocabulary. It responds to charge, the emotional weight riding beneath whatever you're telling it. Think about the difference between someone saying, "I love you" out of habit, on the way out the door, barely looking up from their phone, and someone saying the exact same 3 words after almost losing the person they were saying it to. Same words, entirely different weight. One barely registers. The other reorganizes something inside both people who hear it. Your mind can always tell the difference, even when your mouth can't. So the real question becomes, how do you generate real conviction about wealth when your current reality might be telling you a very different story? Here's where Hill's work gets genuinely practical, instead of abstract. He didn't suggest lying to yourself about your bank balance. He suggested something more precise, borrowing the felt sense of a capability you already have and pointing it at something you haven't reached yet. You don't need to feel rich to feel capable. And capability, it turns out, is something almost everyone already has evidence for, whether they've ever thought to use it this way or not. Think of a specific moment, any moment, where you solved something that once felt unsolvable. Maybe it wasn't about money at all. Maybe it was raising a child alone through a hard year. Maybe it was rebuilding after a divorce nobody thought you'd recover from cleanly. Maybe it was something as ordinary as learning a skill from scratch that terrified you at first, and doing it anyway until your hands stopped shaking around it. That memory carries a felt signature, quiet, earned, undeniable, of a version of you that handled something real. That proof is available to you right now, not as fantasy, as fact, simply aimed in a new direction. This is the actual mechanism behind what Hill called faith, stripped of any religious framing he sometimes wrapped around it for his era. Not blind hope that ignores your circumstances. An earned, functional trust that you are the kind of person who has solved hard things before, which means you are structurally capable of solving this one too. That belief, repeated with the emotional weight of real memory behind it, is what actually retunes the instrument. Not a hollow phrase said at a mirror. A true feeling, drawn from somewhere real in your history and carried towards somewhere new. This changes the entire nature of the practice. You're no longer performing confidence you don't have. You're transferring confidence you've already earned toward a place it hasn't been used yet. And your subconscious, which cannot tell the difference between a vividly felt memory and a vividly felt intention, begins treating the new destination with the same seriousness it gave the old proof. If something in this is landing for you right now, if some part of you just recognized a moment of real capability you'd almost forgotten you had, I want you to do something small before the next block begins. Write the words "I attract wealth" in the comments below, not as a slogan, as a signal to your own mind that you're done reciting hollow words and ready to attach real feeling to a real target. The people who take this small step, who make the internal shift concrete instead of leaving it as a passing thought, are the ones who carry this forward instead of forgetting it by tomorrow morning. Because retuning an instrument isn't something that happens in your head alone. It happens the moment thought and feeling finally point in the same direction, together, on purpose. Now that thought and feeling are finally pointing the same direction, something predictable happens next, and almost nobody warns you about it, which is exactly why it derails so many people right when they're closest to real change. Your mind pushes back, not because something's wrong, because something's working. The moment you start pointing genuine conviction at a new financial reality, your subconscious does something almost protective. It pulls up every piece of proof it has on file that contradicts the new direction. Every failed attempt, every door that closed, every time reaching for more ended in reaching for nothing. This isn't sabotage in the way people usually mean that word. It's closer to a safety check, a system doing exactly the job it was built to do, cross-referencing the new signal against its archive, trying to protect you from a repeat of old pain. Picture someone who finally decides to ask for what they're actually worth, a raise, a higher rate, a bigger deal. The decision feels solid in the morning, clean and certain. By afternoon, their mind has quietly pulled up a highlight reel of every time asking for more went badly. A number said out loud that landed in silence. A proposal that got a polite no. None of that footage is actually about today. It's archived material, playing on a loop as if it were a forecast instead of a memory. This is the exact moment where most people quietly retreat, not through some dramatic failure, but through a private negotiation that happens entirely inside their own head. The archive outvoting the new conviction, and the whole thing getting shelved under maybe later, which is usually just a gentler way of saying never. Here's the part that tends to surprise people once they actually understand it. That archive isn't defeated by more thinking. You cannot out-argue a feeling with logic. You've probably tried and noticed it doesn't work. The only thing that outweighs old proof is new proof, and new proof only gets created through action taken while the discomfort is still present, not after it disappears. Think about someone learning to swim for the first time. No amount of reading about buoyancy removes the fear of letting go of the wall. The fear doesn't leave because they finally understood the physics. It leaves because they let go. The water held them anyway, and their body finally believed something their mind had been insisting on for weeks. Wealth building works on the same principle. You don't wait to feel fully confident before making the call, sending the pitch, asking for the number you actually deserve. You act while the tightness is still sitting there, because that tightness was never a warning sign. Often, it's proof you're finally doing something different enough to matter. Hill described persistence in a way that still holds up today, maybe better today than ever, not as some grand, dramatic show of willpower, but as the quiet decision to keep acting in line with a goal, specifically during the moments when the emotional evidence seems to argue against it. Persistence isn't the absence of doubt. It's action that continues anyway, alongside doubt, until doubt simply runs out of fuel. And here's something worth noticing, because it reframes the entire discomfort you might be feeling right now if any of this sounds familiar. That tight, uneasy sensation that shows up right before a bold financial move. The call you're avoiding, the price you're afraid to ask for, the leap you keep circling without taking. Isn't your body telling you to stop? It's your nervous system registering that you're finally outside the familiar groove worn into you over years. And unfamiliar, to a nervous system built for survival rather than growth, briefly gets misread as dangerous. This is the moment where most self-help content oversimplifies things, telling you to just push through the fear, as if that phrase alone does the work. It doesn't. What actually works is smaller and more specific, recognizing, in real time, that the discomfort you're feeling is outdated data, one instance at a time. Not eliminated. Outdated. The old fear doesn't have to disappear before you move. It just has to stop being the only voice in the room. Picture building a new financial reality as tending a garden while a steady wind keeps blowing seeds off course. The instinct is to wait for the wind to stop before planting anything. But wind rarely stops on its own schedule. The actual skill is learning to plant anyway, seed after seed, trusting that consistent planting eventually outweighs inconsistent wind, not because the wind disappeared, but because enough got planted despite it. So if the archive never fully empties, and the discomfort never fully vanishes before you act, what actually determines whether someone keeps planting long enough for anything to grow, instead of giving up right before the first real result finally shows up? What determines it is something most people never think to examine. The tone they're standing in the middle of every single day, coming from everyone around them. Here's a way to think about it that might feel uncomfortably accurate. If your mind is an instrument being tuned, you're not tuning it in a soundproof room. You're tuning it in a house full of other instruments, all playing at once, all influencing each other whether anyone intends it or not. And some of those instruments have been playing the same note of scarcity for so long, they don't even realize it's a note anymore. To them, it's just the sound of being realistic. Think about the last time you got genuinely excited about a financial decision, a new venture, a bold ask, a plan to finally change something that's been stuck for years, and mentioned it to someone close to you. Watch that memory carefully, because the reaction you got mattered more than you probably realized at the time. Some people lean in. They ask real questions. Something in them lights up alongside you, even briefly. Others, often with nothing but love behind it, respond with caution dressed up as concern. Are you sure that's smart right now? What if it doesn't work out? Have you thought about the risk? That second reaction rarely comes from malice. It almost never does. It comes from someone playing you their own note, their own scarcity, their own ceiling, their own history with money, offered because it's the only tone they know how to play. They believe they're protecting you. But your instrument doesn't parse intention. It only picks up tone, and repeated exposure to doubt, even gentle, well-meaning doubt, quietly pulls your pitch back toward theirs, the way one instrument in a room will eventually drift toward matching another if it's exposed to it long enough. This is why he'll place such heavy emphasis on who a person deliberately surrounds themselves with while building something significant. Not because other people control your results directly, because they shape the room your new tone has to survive in. And a note held with real conviction, exposed daily to indifference or doubt, tends to weaken the way any sound weakens under enough interference, no matter how strong it started out. Picture a man who lost his job in his 40s and quietly started something of his own a year later, working nights at the kitchen table after everyone else went to sleep. Every conversation with one old friend leaves him doubting the whole thing by the time he hangs up. Gentle warnings, careful questions about backup plans, concern that somehow always lands as discouragement. Every conversation with the one person who actually asks how the work is going and means it leaves him thinking clearly again, like static finally clearing off a signal. Same man, same circumstances, two completely different states of mind, depending only on which voice he'd heard most recently that week. This doesn't mean cutting people off dramatically or treating every doubt as betrayal. Most people offering caution genuinely believe they're helping, and treating them as enemies creates a different kind of damage entirely. What it means is becoming honestly aware of which rooms you're spending your attention in, and making sure you're not absorbing more caution than conviction week after week, without ever noticing the balance had tipped. You don't need an entire room of aligned people, either. That expectation stops more people than it helps, because it feels unattainable. Hill's own observations pointed towards something almost counterintuitive on this point, that even one steady relationship, one honest conversation a week with somebody who takes your direction seriously instead of politely humoring it, can do more to protect a new tone than 100 passive hours spent consuming information alone, with no one in your life actually reflecting the change back to you. Here's a question worth sitting with honestly, without performing the answer for anyone, not even yourself. Whose voice have you been absorbing the most, without ever choosing it on purpose? And does that voice still describe who you actually are? Or is it playing an old recording of who you used to be, back before any of this tuning began? Because that answer will quietly decide something important. Whether the new tone you've been practicing gets to hold steady long enough to become your default, or slowly drifts back into the room's original key, the one you've been hearing your entire life, without ever really choosing it. There's one more layer beneath all of this, and it's the one people are often least willing to look at directly, because it doesn't disguise itself as doubt. It disguises itself as decency. Guilt, not the obvious kind. The kind that never announces itself as guilt at all. It shows up wearing the mask of humility, of staying grounded, of not wanting to seem like you think you're better than where you started. A lot of people carry an unspoken belief that real financial ease means leaving someone behind, that if they play a different note than the people they love, it counts as abandonment instead of growth. Think about a man whose older brother stayed in the same small trade their father worked his whole life, still struggling with the same bills their father used to struggle with. The man himself built something different, a business, a career, a life with actual room to breathe. On paper, that's simply a different path. But every time the phone rings, and it's his brother, something in his chest tightens before he even answers. Not because his brother resents him out loud. He doesn't. But the man has quietly decided, without ever saying it, that his own ease is somehow a small betrayal of the life his brother is still living. So he downplays what he's built. He hesitates to mention a good year out loud. He mutes his own signal, instinctively, to avoid feeling like the instrument playing a different note in the room. This is one of the most overlooked walls in this entire process, because from the inside, it never feels like fear. It feels like values. It feels like love, even. And it can keep a genuinely capable person circling the same financial ceiling for years, convinced the whole time that staying smaller is a form of loyalty, when really it's just an old, unexamined rule about what's safe to want out loud in the presence of people who haven't gotten there yet. Here's the reframe that actually matters, and it isn't about distancing yourself from anyone. It's about separating two things that got tangled together without your permission: genuine love for the people in your life, and the belief that your growth requires their permission, or worse, requires you to shrink so the gap between you never feels too wide. Those are not the same thing. You can love your brother completely, want good things for him, stay close to him in every way that matters, and still play your own note at full volume instead of muting it out of guilt. In fact, the version of you playing quietly, hiding your progress to protect someone else's comfort, has never actually helped anyone. It's just made your own instrument harder to hear, including for yourself. Hill wrote about the importance of channeling emotion, even difficult emotion, towards something constructive rather than letting it sit and used or turn against you. A hard relationship with money in your family history doesn't have to become a ceiling you inherit and protect. It can become the exact reason you refuse to stop the moment things start feeling comfortable. Not despite the people who struggled before you. Because of them. Because someone in your line finally converting struggle into ease is not a betrayal of the struggle. It's the only thing that ever makes the struggle mean something. That shift changes the entire emotional weight of what you're building. It stops feeling like outgrowing the people you love and starts feeling like carrying something forward on their behalf, whether they ever say that out loud or not. The guilt loosens its grip the moment you realize your instrument was never supposed to match the room. It was only ever supposed to find its own true note, clearly enough that eventually, it might even help someone else find theirs. If you've stayed with me until this point in the video, it's because you're committed to creating a life of abundance and success. That's why I invite you to subscribe to the channel. Every video here is designed to help you develop the mindset that attracts wealth, prosperity, and new opportunities every single day. Because underneath the guilt, underneath the doubt, underneath every old note this instrument was ever taught to play, there's one more layer left to uncover. And it's the one that decides, more than anything else we've talked about so far, whether all of this actually holds once the camera stops rolling and real life resumes. So let's open that layer honestly, because it's been sitting quietly underneath everything else in this conversation, waiting for its moment. What determines whether any of this holds once real-life resumes is what happens the instant you actually get some of what you've been asking for. This sounds like it shouldn't be a problem, but for a surprising number of people, it is one of the biggest problems in the entire process. Because right now, if your finances haven't shifted yet, there's a strange kind of shelter in that. An explanation that covers everything without requiring anything further from you. The timing was wrong. The economy, the people who didn't help when they could have. As long as the outcome hasn't arrived, that explanation stays fully intact. And, oddly enough, it's safer than the outcome would be, because an explanation can't fail. Only a real attempt can fail. The moment your new tuning actually starts working, a client says yes, an opportunity lands, momentum finally shows up after months of nothing. Something unexpected can happen right alongside the excitement. A flicker of unease that has nothing to do with losing money and everything to do with losing the excuse. Because if this actually works, there's no more room to hide behind circumstance. It stops being about what you could do, if only things were different. It becomes about what you actually did, in full view, with no shadow left to stand in. Picture a woman at a family gathering, years from now, being asked what she's been working on, and for the first time, having nothing to deflect with. No, it's still early. No, we'll see how it goes. Just a real answer, sitting out in the open, that either holds up under the room's attention or doesn't. For years, she'd quietly preferred the version of the conversation where she stayed modest about an unfinished project, because an unfinished project can't be judged. A finished one can. The moment it works, she's no longer protected by "we'll see." She's standing fully in "here's what happened." And some part of her, strangely, misses the cover of not knowing yet. This is often the real reason people quietly sabotage themselves right at the edge of a breakthrough. Not because they're incapable, but because full success means giving up the identity of someone who was always about to arrive somewhere. Someone whose actual ceiling never got tested in the open. That identity, uncomfortable as it sounds, comes with its own strange safety. An unfinished thing can't be measured. A finished one can be seen by everyone, including the parts of it that fell short. Hill placed enormous weight on something that sounds almost too simple to matter here. The gap between wanting something and being willing to be fully seen wanting it. A quiet want stays comfortably private, protected from ever being measured against reality. A want strong enough to matter is willing to be visible, spoken out loud, attempted in daylight, open to the possibility of falling short in front of people who are watching. Here's something worth asking yourself honestly, without performing the answer for anyone, not even yourself. If every external obstacle disappeared tonight, the timing, the funding, the people who never helped, would you actually know which note to play? Or has the obstacle, quietly, become part of the instrument itself? Something to lean against. Something that explains the silence without ever requiring you to test whether the music was ever real to begin with. This isn't meant to feel harsh. It's meant to feel honest, because honesty is the only thing that actually loosens this particular knot. The moment you can name this fear, not judge it, just name it clearly, the same way you've named every other pattern we've walked through together, it starts losing the quiet authority it held while it stayed unspoken. Because everything we've covered so far, the inherited filter, the frequency you were never asked if you wanted, the archive of old evidence, the room shaping your tone without your permission, the guilt disguised as loyalty, all of it eventually arrives at this single, final test. Not whether you can think your way toward wealth, whether you can survive actually having it, without quietly finding a way to hand it back. So what does surviving that test actually look like, in practice, once the excitement fades and the newness of it becomes simply your life? It looks smaller than people expect, almost anticlimactic, because the real shift isn't a single dramatic moment where everything changes at once. It's the accumulation of ordinary days where the new tone simply becomes the one you reach for first, without having to think your way there anymore. Here's something worth understanding about how any new pattern actually becomes permanent. In the beginning, every deliberate thought, every intentional redirection away from an old fear, takes real effort, the same way learning to drive takes total concentration at first, both hands locked on the wheel, eyes darting to every mirror, nothing automatic yet. But something happens with enough consistent repetition. The effort quietly transfers out of conscious thought and into structure. The driver stops thinking about the brake. The hands simply know. What once required constant attention becomes something closer to instinct, running quietly in the background while your mind is free to focus on something else entirely. This is what actually happens to a mind being deliberately retuned toward abundance. In the early months, you notice yourself catching an old scarcity thought and replacing it on purpose, a real, effortful act, done again and again, sometimes multiple times in a single hour. It feels, honestly, a little exhausting at first, and that exhaustion is normal. It's the cost of building new structure. But somewhere along the way, without a specific day marking the change, the new thought starts arriving first, on its own, without the correction needed to get there. Not because you tried harder that particular week, because the repetition finally did what repetition always does. It moved from something you practiced into something you simply are. Think about someone who spent a year deliberately stopping themselves from saying, "We can't afford that," out loud in front of their kids, replacing it on purpose with something more accurate, like, "That's not what we're choosing to spend on right now." At first, that substitution felt stiff, almost rehearsed, like a foreign phrase in an unfamiliar accent. A year later, it isn't a substitution anymore. It's simply what comes out, unprompted, the actual first response instead of a corrected one. The new track finally became the track the mind reaches for by default. This is why the timeline in this process matters more than people want it to. Hill's own writing kept circling back to persistence not as a burst of motivation, but as a kind of unglamorous continuity, showing up in the exact same direction on the days that offer no evidence anything is different yet. Those unremarkable days, the ones that feel like absolutely nothing is happening, are doing more of the actual work than the occasional dramatic breakthrough that gets all the attention afterward. Think about a photograph developing in a darkroom, back before anything was digital. For a long stretch after the print goes into the chemical bath, nothing visible happens at all. The paper just sits there, blank, and if you didn't know how the process worked, you'd assume nothing was occurring. But underneath that blank surface, the image is already forming, gradually, invisibly, until the exact moment it crosses a threshold and appears, seemingly all at once. Though it had been developing the entire time, it looked like nothing was there. This is where a lot of people quietly give up. Not out of impatience exactly, but out of a reasonable-sounding conclusion that if nothing visible has changed yet, nothing is actually happening. That conclusion feels logical. It's also almost always wrong. Because retuning a mind and rebuilding a life both happen beneath the surface long before either one becomes visible from the outside. And the blank stretch isn't evidence of failure. It's usually evidence that the image is still forming. There's a specific kind of person this process rewards most, not the person with the most talent or even the strongest initial conviction, but the person willing to keep playing the new note through the exact stretch where nothing yet proves it's working. Hill studied that quality closely, and what struck him wasn't how rare raw talent was. It was how rare it was for someone to keep showing up, consistently, through a period offering no proof, yet that showing up mattered at all. So the real question isn't whether you have what it takes. Almost everyone does, more than they realize. The real question is whether you're willing to keep playing the note on the days that feel like nothing is listening, because those are exactly the days, it turns out, that decide everything that comes after. There's a question worth asking now, because we've spent this entire conversation talking about retuning an instrument, but an instrument doesn't exist in isolation. It exists to be played, day after day, in the actual conditions of a life. So let's talk about what that looks like when it's not a metaphor anymore. When it's an ordinary Tuesday, the same Tuesday we talked about earlier, except now it's actually here. Here's something almost nobody says out loud about this process, and it might be the most honest thing in this entire video. Some days, the old note is just going to be louder. Not because you failed, not because the retuning didn't take, because you're human, and humans have days where an unexpected expense lands, or a conversation goes badly, or exhaustion makes everything feel heavier than it actually is. On those days, scarcity will feel, briefly, like the truth again, like the tuning never happened at all. This is exactly where people misunderstand the whole process and quietly abandon it at the worst possible moment. They mistake a single loud day for proof that nothing changed. But think about what happens to any trained skill during a bad day. A pianist who's played for 20 years still has an off night. Fingers a little stiff, timing a little late. Nobody watching would conclude that 20 years of practice evaporated overnight. They'd correctly understand it as a bad night sitting on top of real, durable skill. The skill didn't disappear. It just got harder to access for a few hours, under difficult conditions. Your relationship with money works the same way once the retuning has genuinely taken hold. A hard day doesn't erase months of consistent redirection. It just makes the old note temporarily louder than usual, the way weather can make a familiar road briefly harder to drive, without changing the fact that you know the road perfectly well. The mistake isn't having the hard day. The mistake is deciding the hard day is the real evidence, and the months of quiet progress were the illusion, when it's almost always the other way around. Here's a distinction Hill returned to often, in different words but the same underlying idea: the difference between a temporary defeat and a permanent one. A temporary defeat is simply information. A bad quarter, a deal that fell through, a day where fear got louder than usual. It becomes permanent only at the exact moment you decide to read it as a verdict on who you are, instead of a passing condition you're moving through. The same event, interpreted two different ways, produces two entirely different outcomes. One person treats a hard month as proof they should quit, and stops. Another treats the identical hard month as weather, and keeps walking through it toward the same direction they'd already chosen. Picture two people who both lose a significant client in the same month, through no real fault of their own. A company downsizing, a budget cut somewhere upstream that has nothing to do with the quality of their work. The circumstances are identical for both of them. What differs is which sentence gets permission to finish itself in their mind. One lets an old, familiar voice complete the thought. See, this is why people like me don't get to have that. The other interrupts it halfway through with something quieter, harder one. This happened. It doesn't change the direction. It changes the schedule. Same event. Two different endings to the same sentence. And only one of them keeps the tuning intact long enough to reach the other side of the setback. This is the part of the process that almost never gets talked about honestly, because it's less inspiring than the initial breakthrough. Maintaining a new frequency isn't a single decision made once. It's a series of small returns, made over and over, every time life temporarily turns the volume back up on the old note. You don't maintain a tuned instrument by never encountering interference. You maintain it by knowing how to return to pitch quickly, without treating every disruption as proof the whole calibration was fake to begin with. There's a practical question worth asking yourself here. Honestly, when you have a hard financial day, and you will, because everyone does, what's the very first sentence your mind reaches for? Is it a verdict about who you are, spoken as if it were permanent fact? Or is it something closer to weather, acknowledged, felt, and moved through, without being mistaken for the whole forecast? Because that single distinction, small as it sounds, might matter more than anything else we've discussed so far. Not whether hard days happen. They will, for absolutely everyone, regardless of how deep the retuning goes. What matters is whether a hard day gets to rewrite the whole story, or whether it simply becomes one difficult page inside a story that's still clearly heading somewhere else entirely. So let's bring this back to where the whole conversation started. That first quiet claim, made before you had any reason yet to believe it. That your brain was already a magnet, just tuned to the wrong thing. You've spent this entire video learning what that actually means, layer by layer. Not as a saying, as a mechanism, a lens built by repetition, silently deciding what gets through and what gets filtered out before you're even aware there was a choice being made. A frequency shaped by years of exposure you never consented to, playing a note you mistook for personality. An archive of old evidence, ready to resurface the instant you point real conviction somewhere new. A room full of other instruments, some of them pulling your pitch back toward theirs without either of you meaning any harm. A guilt that never called itself guilt, dressed instead as loyalty, as humility, as staying grounded. And underneath all of it, the quiet fear of what happens if this actually works. The fear of losing the one explanation that never had to be tested. None of that makes you broken. It makes you someone who inherited an instrument already tuned by other hands, long before you ever picked it up yourself. Here's the part worth sitting with, because it's easy to miss after everything we've covered. You are not starting from zero. You were never starting from zero. Every hard thing you've already survived, every ordinary Tuesday you got through without falling apart, every moment of quiet capability you've forgotten to count as evidence, that's not separate from this process. That's the raw material it's built from. You already know how to keep playing through difficulty. You've been doing it your entire life. The only shift is choosing, on purpose now, which note you're playing it toward. Because that's really what retuning has meant this whole time. Not becoming someone unrecognizable. Becoming someone who finally chose the frequency instead of inheriting it. Someone whose default reach, on an ordinary afternoon with no camera watching and nothing to prove to anyone, no longer snaps first to panic or drifts without direction the way it used to. It settles, instead, into something steadier. A working kind of confidence that has, without a sound, replaced the old, tired story about people like you. That shift doesn't arrive all at once. You know that by now. It arrives the way every real shift in this conversation has arrived. Through repetition without spectacle, through conviction rebuilt one honest rep at a time, through ordinary days that looked like nothing was happening until, quietly, they were the entire foundation. There was never going to be a single dramatic morning where everything changed at once. There was only ever going to be enough ordinary mornings strung together until the new note simply became the first one you reach for, without having to think your way there anymore. You already started. Maybe you didn't notice the exact moment it happened. Most people don't. It rarely announces itself. It just becomes true, quietly, somewhere in the middle of an unremarkable week, long after the moment that would have made a good story to tell. And now, whatever happens next, the flat stretches, the loud days, the old evidence that occasionally resurfaces uninvited, you'll recognize it for exactly what it is. Not proof that nothing changed. Just weather, moving across an instrument that's already been retuned, holding its pitch a little longer each time, until holding it stops requiring effort at all. Let's come back, one last time, to the very first thing I said to you. Your brain is already a magnet. It just hasn't been tuned to attract wealth. It's been tuned to attract lack. You know now that sentence wasn't a hook. It was a diagnosis. And everything since then, the lens, the frequency, the archive, the room, the guilt, the fear of losing the excuse, wasn't information handed to you to admire from a distance. It was a map of an instrument you've been carrying your entire life, without ever being shown how it worked. You don't need a single dramatic moment to prove any of this took. You won't wake up one morning and feel like an entirely different person, and if you're waiting for that feeling before you believe any of this is real, you'll wait long past the point where it already started working. It shows up smaller than that. It shows up the day you catch an old thought mid-sentence and, without much effort at all, finish it differently than you would have a year ago. It shows up in a conversation about money that doesn't tighten your chest the way it used to. It shows up in the silence after a setback, when the old verdict tries to load automatically, and something in you, almost without noticing, declines to finish that sentence the old way. That's the entire transformation, actually, just wearing plainer clothes than the dramatic ones you were taught to expect. Somewhere behind you now is the version of you who believed this was about luck, or timing, or being born into the right circumstances. That version wasn't wrong to feel stuck. They were operating an instrument they never chose the tuning for, doing their best with an inheritance nobody asked them if they wanted. You're not that far from them, actually. You're one deliberate repetition away, most days. The distance was never as large as it felt. What changes now isn't your circumstances. Not yet, maybe not today. What changes is which note you reach for first. On a Tuesday with nothing to prove and no one watching. The exact kind of moment where the old tuning used to run the show without you noticing. Direction instead of drift. A working kind of steadiness instead of the old panic dressed up as realism. That reach, repeated enough times, on enough days like that, is the entire mechanism. It was always the entire mechanism. Everything else was just explaining why it works. This is what it actually means for money to stop feeling like something you chase. Not that it arrives without effort, only that it stops requiring you to hunt, to force, to prove yourself worthy of it one exhausting attempt at a time, and starts, quietly, finding its way to an instrument that's finally holding a steady enough field to be worth finding. There's a version of your life on the other side of this, not louder, not more dramatic, just steadier in a way that's hard to perform and easy to feel. A version where an unexpected bill doesn't rearrange your whole nervous system, where wanting more doesn't feel like betraying anyone you love, where the story you tell yourself about what you're capable of finally matches what you've actually already survived. That version isn't waiting for permission from anywhere outside you. It's waiting for the same thing every retuned instrument has ever waited for. Enough repetition on enough unremarkable days to become the default instead of the exception. You already know how to do this part. You've done it your whole life, just aimed at things you didn't choose on purpose. Now you get to aim it. Play the new note today. Not perfectly, not without the old one occasionally trying to interrupt. Just consistently, the way water finds its way through stone, not through force, but through simply refusing to stop showing up in the same direction. Follow the channel if this one landed. and send it to 5 people who are still playing a note they never chose to play.